Welcome to our How to Do Research and Get Published webinar on how to conduct a reference search and to format your reference section. To get started today, I want to present you to the team. First, Jessica Offenberger is a publishing editor on the STM Journal's editorial team. She manages a range of science and medicine journals, working with editors and societies to develop new strategies and problem solve. During her time at Sage, she has worked closely with the author team to create and develop resources to help early career researchers better understand the publishing process and publish their research. Jessica has a background in project management, marketing, business development, and self-publishing. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from Michigan State University and is currently based in Los Angeles. Next, Hannah Pearsons is an editorial assistant at Sage. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of South Carolina and studied English and American Sign Language at Clemson University. We're also joined by Hannah Cherry, marketing manager working on both the author marketing and product marketing teams at Sage. Her role involves supporting authors throughout their publishing journey and delivering marketing expertise to support the growth of Sage's renowned STM and HSS journals. She holds a BA in English Literature from the University of Leeds and an MA in Women's Studies from the University of York. And last, I'm Sean Scarsbrick, a marketing manager on the author marketing team at Sage. My primary role is to provide support to authors and reviewers as they move through the publishing process, with a particular focus on providing targeted resources and support at the appropriate time in the publication process. I have a BA in history from Manhattan College and an MA in history from Hunter College, and I am based out of New York. Today, as we go through the webinar, please pop any questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can, but time constraints may not allow us to answer every one, but we'll follow up after the webinar. In addition, if you see any questions that you particularly like that you want answered, please do upvote them, and we'll start with that at the start of the Q&A portion. So on your screen here, you'll see an illustration of the typical author journey, moving from the early stages of securing funding, conducting research, all the way through peer review and publication. Today, we're focusing specifically on how to conduct a reference search and format your reference section. We encourage you to go back and watch recordings of other topics we've covered in the series, including how to write and format a manuscript and how to navigate the peer review process. And with that, I'm passing over to Hannah Cherry.
Thank you. So before we explore how to conduct a reference search and format your reference section, we're going to talk a bit about references themselves. So what do we mean by references? References are lists of sources such as books, journal articles, websites, interviews, documentaries, and more. And these are all used to research and write an academic paper. So by referencing sources in their paper, authors find support for their claims and give credit to other researchers. References are typically cited within both the paper as an in-text citation and listed at the end of the paper in a reference section as well. So these in-text citations, might come in the form of parenthetical citations or footnotes, and the reference section might also be referred to as a works cited page or bibliography. So here you can see there's an example of an in-text citation. So this screenshot was taken from a Journal of Management article and shows a paragraph from an article called Spoiled for Choice, when work flexibility improves or impairs work-life outcomes. So in this paragraph, most sentences cite a reference within parentheses that appear at the end of the sentence. So for example, the first sentence states, the rise of the knowledge work economy over the past several decades has brought with it trends towards granting employees greater control and flexibility, and ends with a hyperlinked citation to a 2009 article by authors Grant and Parker. We can assume that the Grant and Parker article supports this sentence's claim about trends toward greater control and flexibility for knowledge work employees. Similarly, in the last sentence in this paragraph, it uses two statistics about remote work from home preferences, and the sentence starts with a citation from the Pew Research Center. So this shows that the authors of this paragraph got the statistics from the Pew Research Center. And here we have an example of the reference section from the same article. So this reference section is titled References, and you can see in the first three entries, which all happen to be journal articles, are listed in alphabetical order. So these reference entries include information about each reference, such as the authors, the publication date, the article and journal title, the specific pages cited, as well as the DOI. So that's because readers should be able to consult your reference section and find the exact references that you used in your paper. But why are references important? So references are a crucial part of any academic publication. First, references build an author's credibility. In the previous example, if the authors included those statistics about work from home preferences but didn't cite a reference, the reader has no reason to believe that these statistics are true. Did the authors find the statistics themselves? Did they make them up? So citing references really shows that you know how to conduct academic research, and this helps to build your credibility. Second, references are an important ethical consideration as well. So failing to cite a reference is actually a form of plagiarism, even if it's done by accident. So it's really important to give credit where credit is due. So if you use someone else's work to support your own, the ethical thing to do is cite them. And then lastly, proper referencing really allows others to verify your sources and duplicate your findings, which is a really important aspect of the ecosystem of scholarly research. So how do you know what information needs a reference and what doesn't? Here we have a list of things you should always cite, such as quotes, whether direct, paraphrased, or summarized, statistics gathered by others, specific facts or data gathered by others, the ideas, arguments, and findings of others, and outside figures, such as tables and images. The commonality here is that any external ideas or support must be cited. Excuse me. On the other hand, there are some things that you don't need references for. So, for example, you do not need to cite information that is common knowledge or widely known. So, in an example such as it's quite common knowledge that the sky is blue, so you wouldn't necessarily need to cite that information in an academic paper. But the fact that the sky is blue due to a phenomenon called the Rayleigh scattering is lesser known, and you probably want to include a reference to support this specific fact. Additionally, you don't have to cite any original claim or argument you might be making. However, if someone else reads your work and mentions your argument in their own paper, they would have to cite you. That's how the academic conversation works. When in doubt, always provide a citation or attribution, even if an article or image is published open access under a CC BY license and is free to reuse, attribution is still required. And I'll pass it over to Jessica.
Thank you, Hannah. So let's take a brief look at how to actually find these references. Where can you start? So it's useful to begin your reference search with these preliminary steps that you see here on the screen. First, you need to narrow down exactly what you're researching. Maybe you already know what you're researching. Write it down concisely and use it as a roadmap for research. Maybe you're still trying to pinpoint your topic. If that's the case, go into the research, see what others are saying, and investigate a few possible angles until you find the one you'd like to research. Related to this, it's helpful to know your field of study. This will help determine where your potential references might live. Think broadly, as your topic might reach across disciplines. Think about what journals you and your colleagues read. Think about where you go for the latest research developments. How do you stay up to date with trends in your discipline? This could also tie into how you're actually selecting a journal to publish in, and we have a webinar in our webinar library on that. Third, jot down some relevant keywords. This will help refine your search, especially if you're using databases, which we'll discuss in a moment. And lastly, like all of your research, from the data collection to manuscript writing, you'll want to get organized. It's important to keep track of resources that help you during your research process. There are a few different methods. Some scholars keep track of resources digitally by keeping a list in a spreadsheet or another document. Some prefer a manual method and some use note cards. You'll want to remind yourself what information you gathered from which source. By knowing your organizational method ahead of time, you can be sure to follow that from the get-go. So just like when you're outlining your manuscript, you provide that framework. Same thing with organizing your references. You want to keep that clear and nicely organized. And we'll go through a few tools that you can use as well. So thinking about databases, you've narrowed down your topic, you know your field of study, you've jotted down some keywords, and you know how you want to keep all of this organized. You're finally ready to conduct a reference search. The next step is to consult some databases. Databases are digital collections of scholarly materials. Databases might cover a specific discipline or contain research related to many disciplines. They might be open access. The articles might require a subscription. And if you're affiliated with the college or university, you'll likely have access to at least some of the databases through your library or organization. On the slide here, you can see several popular databases such as PubMed, Web of Science, and APA's PsycInfo. When you're searching on here, you can access a variety of research depending on your discipline, the journals, and there's many different indexing criteria for a journal to be listed in these, but these are all great resources. And of course, our own Sage Journals website, where we have over 1,200 journals that we publish. So you can use these databases to start actually searching for the right literature to conduct your reference search. So if we take a look at an example here, this is a screenshot of PubMed, NIH. At the top, there's a logo for the National Library of Medicine, who operates PubMed, and in the middle of the page, we see a search bar. So PubMed is free to access, so we're ready to type in our topic and search. We talked about remote work, as you can see in some of our trends, so let's continue to look at that. Once we type in remote work into the search bar and click search, you're brought to a results page. In this screenshot, you can see the first two results out of 1,400 or 1,402 results, and both of these articles deal with COVID-19. On the left side is a column of options you can select or deselect to filter your results. And most databases will come with some sort of version of this feature where you can filter based on article type, year, and more. Sometimes the publication type as well. You can filter those results by journal articles, conference papers, books. And then you can also narrow your search by using something called Boolean operators. The three main Boolean operators are and, or, and not. By using these three operators, you can define and refine your reference search by combining or excluding search terms. So our previous recommendation of having keywords and these key terms, this is where that comes in handy. You can use the operator and in all caps to search for documents that include both terms. For example, if you search PubMed for remote work and women, the database retrieves articles related to remote work and gender equality, remote work and women's health, and more. Anything that would tie those terms together. The operator or, also in caps, instructs the database to retrieve information on either topic. So this is especially useful if your topic has synonyms or other keywords. So if you search PubMed for remote work or work from home, the database retrieves more documents than when using the search terms remote work or work from home alone, like so on those individual searches. Lastly, using the operator not in all caps retrieves materials related to the former search term, but excludes materials related to the latter. So maybe you want to research remote work without any discussion of COVID-19. The results look incredibly different from the previous slide where we searched for remote work a minute ago, where we saw COVID-19 being those top two search results. So what are those best practices for finding references? First, we talk about this, I feel like, in every webinar, understanding that the length of a manuscript and the number of references is based on the article research and article type. So typically, original research will have 9 or more references in a manuscript. The best thing we recommend is to look at the author guidelines for the type of manuscript you are interested in submitting and tailor your manuscript accordingly, and then citing anything that is relevant. Really, you want to make sure you're giving credit where credit is due, and citing relevant articles. Second, you'll want to understand the difference between references and your acknowledgements. References are at the end of the manuscript, illustrating what other articles you are citing in your own manuscript. The acknowledgement section is outlining anyone who may have contributed to the manuscript other than the main authors. So while these are considered end materials, they're two completely different sections, not to be confused. You should also note that your reference page shows how well versed you are in the field that your topic encompasses. It will also show that you're only including research from certain areas. It's important to really review a wide range of sources. So for instance, if you're submitting to an international journal is going to want to see international representation in your reference page. An international journal has an international audience, and then your references, your citations, the literature that you're reviewing should reflect that. And then lastly, when it comes to finding and choosing references, it's the relevance of the citation that matters more. Padding a reference page with unrelated publications or unrelated self-publications or colleagues' publications is not a good practice. Also, if the journal you're submitting to requires that you anonymize the paper before submission, I advise you to anonymize the citations if there are more than 3 self-publications or if the self-publications are classified as gray literature. So now I'll pass that over to Hannah Pearson.
Thank you, Jessica. Now, let's say that you've finished your research, you have written and revised your paper. It's time to ensure that your references are cited correctly and organized into a proper reference section. The formatting of both your in-text citations and your reference section will depend on your chosen citation style. Citation styles are standardized guidelines that determine the look and layout of your citations and your reference section. Common citation styles include MLA, APA, and Chicago style. If you're a student submitting an assignment, your instructor will likely tell you which style guide to use. Similarly, when you submit an academic paper for publication, the journal you submit to will likely request a specific citation style. In the next few slides, we're going to dive deeper into the 3 most common citation styles required by SAGE's manuscript submission guidelines. We'll also have a bonus one at the end. So these 3 most common citation styles for SAGE are APA, Harvard, and Vancouver. APA style or APA format is the citation style developed by the American Psychological Association. Full guidelines can be found in the Citation Guide, which is the current edition, the 7th edition of the Publication Manual of the American Psychological Association. It's the preferred style guide in the behavioral and social sciences. For an in-text citation, that's a citation that happens in the meat of your paper, list the author's last name and the year of publication in parentheses. Here's an example from earlier. The rise of the knowledge work economy over the past several decades has brought with it trends towards granting employees greater control and flexibility. Parentheses, Grant and Parker, 2009. Because that reference has 2 authors, you list both connected by an ampersand. You might be wondering, what if there were 3 authors? What if there was no publication date? What if? There are a lot of what ifs when it comes to formatting your in-text citations and your reference sheet. And for all those what ifs, you're going to go straight to the style guide, which is readily available online. So if you do consult the publication manual of the American Psychological Association or search for those guidelines online, you'll find instructions on how to format citations for each reference type. So whether it's a book, an interview, a movie, you can find out how to format it. So on this slide, we see an example of how to format a citation entry referencing a journal article. You'll probably do this a lot. It's important to note that these formatting instructions are very specific, down to the punctuation. Do not mess with the suggested formatting in any way. For example, don't add quotation marks or bold, underline, or italicize any text not specified in the guidelines. So below the correct APA format, we see an example of an actual journal article cited in APA. Entries in an APA reference section should be in alphabetical order, A to Z, and the section should be titled References. Next up, we have Harvard style, which is commonly used in academic fields such as the humanities, the social sciences, and business. Similar to what we just looked at, similar to APA, in-text citations in Harvard style feature the author's last name, but followed by page numbers if applicable. Reference sections can be titled either references or bibliography, and they are also listed in alphabetical order. There are some variations. So here's an example from Sage's Harvard Style Guide. One quirk of the Harvard Style Guide is that initials are used without spaces. So if a author has a first and a middle initial, you list both together, as with the example here, E.J. Hughes. And again, for all your questions and what ifs, you're going to want to consult the style guide online. Next, let's take a quick look at Vancouver style. Vancouver style is often used in biomedical and health science fields. Unlike APA and Harvard, Vancouver style uses superscripts for in-text citations. And you can see an example of a superscript in the second bullet point of this slide. It's the little number 1 hovering after the period. These numerical superscripts correspond with a reference entry in the reference list. And since these references are cited in the order in which they appear, the reference list is in numerical order rather than alphabetical order. This reference section should also be called references. Here are 2 examples of journal articles cited in Vancouver style, and perhaps you can see some differences from the previous styles we've looked at. So for example, the publication date appears later in the reference entry than in both APA and Harvard style. And again, be sure to consult your style guide for more specifics. And finally, we'd like to share some information on AMA style. This citation style follows the American Medical Association's Manual of Style. And as the name suggests, it's commonly used in the medical field. It is also required when submitting an article to any journal published by the AMA. AMA style is similar to Vancouver style, not only because they are both commonly used in medicine, but also because the reference sections are titled references. The in-text citation should appear as superscripts, and the reference entries are also in numerical order. On this slide, we share the proper format for an AMA reference entry. In this case, we're also citing a journal article. So from the example, we can see 2 of the requirements of AMA format on display. The first is that the article title appears in sentence case. That means that only the first word of the title is capitalized. Second, the journal name, which appears in italics, is written as it's listed in the National Library of Medicine databases. So instead of Annals of Nutrition and Metabolism, the reference simply shows an abbreviated version and NutriMetab. So how do you ensure that your reference section is formatted correctly? We just gave you some examples, but clearly these citation requirements are strict and you need to follow it to the letter. So how do you do this? Some researchers use tools called reference managers. Reference managers allow you to store and organize your references. They aggregate your references in one place and can generate citations for you. They are good for annotating your work and also for working with your fellow authors. Examples include ProCite, EndNote, BibTeX, Medlars, and RefWorks. Formatting citations and organizing your reference section can be tricky. It can be comforting to know that the citation styles are something to be followed, not memorized. Whenever my students came to me asking a specific question, like I said, tell them, I'm not the style guide, go look at the style guide. It is there to be referenced, not memorized. There are plenty of resources online to make sure your citations and reference sections are formatted correctly. For example, if you find a source online via a database, the database might generate citations for its readers. You can then copy and paste these directly into your reference section. On this slide, we have 2 screenshots from the Sage Journals database that illustrate this point. So the screenshot on the left shows what appears when you click on an article, when you open it. And we've added a blue arrow to highlight a tab within the menu bar, which says Cite Article. And if you click on this Cite Article tab, you will open up a side panel, which is captured in a screenshot to the right. Within this panel, Sage Journals gives you the option to either copy the citation or download it directly to your reference manager. You can also use a free online citation generator like Citation Machine, Scribr, EndNote, or EasyBib. Simply select your citation style within these tools, input the requested information, and let the generator create the citation for you. It plugs in all of the requirements and formats it correctly. Before using a citation generator, I recommend reading Purdue OWL's Using Citation Generators Responsibly guide to learn how to use these citation generators properly. Some of these tools are prone to errors, and they aren't foolproof methods of ensuring that your citation references are correct. So whether you use a tool or not, know that the responsibility to use the right reference style and craft proper citations rests with you, the author. In addition to the tools previously listed, you can always consult the style guides. If you are submitting to a journal, again, check their manuscript submissions and be sure to follow any guidance regarding citations, reference sections, and formatting. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Jessica.
Thank you. So a few key takeaways and things to summarize what we've gone through today. References are a list of sources. This is books, journal articles, websites used to research and write an academic paper. You can find references through online databases and use Boolean operators and, or, and not to refine your search accordingly. References are typically cited within the paper as in-text citations and listed at the end of the paper in a reference section. And the specific formatting of your in-text citations and reference sections is determined by your citation style. And so with that, before we go into the Q&A, I just wanted to share some upcoming webinars just to give you a sneak peek of what's coming up. So next month, we're looking at qualitative methodology, where the qualitative methodology invites researchers to collect their views and experiences, stories, and expressions of people who have knowledge of the research problem. And so joining Janet Salmons and our team to learn how to write a compelling paper based on your qualitative research. And then looking at webinars coming up in April and May, as well as in the future, we have that. So without further ado, let's dive into the questions here. I see some great questions that have been raised. Just so everyone knows, this presentation and recording will be circulated, so you can always go back and reference that. Let's see, where do we want to start? I see a question here of would you recommend using separate reference managing apps or softwares when reading and writing? I'm happy to start off with that, and Hannah, if you want to jump in. I think this all falls to your organizational method on how you prefer to organize your literature review and finding these references. A lot of people find these softwares and these apps super helpful while doing their reading and writing. And these tools that Hannah had talked about really do come in handy. Other people just keep a spreadsheet or a Google Docs or even note cards bookmarks. So Hannah, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add on that.
If you're in a class, maybe ask your instructor if these tools are recommended or if they want you to use these at this point early on. It might be better to get your hands dirty and not use those tools. And then also some journals, some organizations will recommend tools and some won't. So there might be some guidance there. Otherwise, like Jessica said, up to your discretion.
Thanks. I see quite a few comments in the Q&A about formatting. Like Hannah mentioned, the best thing is to reference the specific style guide. Every style guide is slightly different. And yes, journal titles are typically italicized in the various style guides. But again, we encourage you to reference those citation generators or the style guides themselves when it comes to specifics, like do you need to mention page numbers? One thing worth noting is some articles don't have a DOI, or it might be missing in that reference. This might happen with some older articles, or maybe the source doesn't have a DOI. It is possible, it does happen from time to time, and it's just in that case you would leave it out. Again, check the style guide to see what they recommend putting in that place, what other information is necessary. Hannah, anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think you covered it.
Great. And this is something too that journal editors will flag to you from time to time. They might say, oh, the DOI is missing, and you'll say, well, this doesn't have a DOI, or it didn't have that at its time. So yes. Just taking a look here at some of the other questions. Hannah, I don't know if you see one that you want to answer. Feel free to jump in as well.
Yes, I think I saw some folks asking about the most popular or most widely used style for social sciences, and that is going to be APA. But again, check the guidelines of where you're hoping to submit this journal. And I think I saw some questions about, do you need to change your style guide? If you submit somewhere and you wrote it in one style and they're only accepting another, yes, you are going to want to meet the requirements of where you are submitting the paper, meet the requirements of the journal.
Related to that, I saw a couple questions come in about what's an index, or what are indices or databases. So an index is a platform that houses different journals or conference proceedings or abstracts or publications. And for us at SAGE, most of those indices fall around indexing journals. And so the impact factor is hosted through Web of Science, owned by Clarivate. You also have Cite Score, that's through Scopus. You have the directory of open access journals, so the DOAJ, that is an index for open access journals. And journals go through an application process to become part of these. So newer journals may or may not be part of some of these indices early on, but they apply and will ultimately, hopefully, will get indexed in these various indices. So it's just another type of database that people use. So same with PubMed. There is an application process for journals to be indexed in PubMed, which houses PubMed Central and Medline, two terms that you might be familiar with if you're more on the STEM side of research. So oftentimes we get a lot of questions, or, I'm looking for journals that are in this quartile of this index, like Scopus or Web of Science. You can look on each journal homepage. This will be very clear and transparent to say which indices each journal is part of. And you can also take a look in the index itself, like Web of Science, Scopus, DOAJ. Then on the SAGE Journals platform, we have a metrics and indexing page that you can reference all of this and show which indices each journal is indexed in. Hannah, anything you want to add there?
No, that covers it. Let's see, we have a question about how we talked about when you write a general statement, there's no need to cite it. And can we explain this a bit more with an example? So there'll be a lot of content in your paper. There'll be the original thoughts and arguments that you make. There'll be the thoughts and arguments of others that you cite. And then there's this weird in-between things where you probably don't have to cite it because it is, as we said, a general statement. The example given earlier is that the sky is blue. That's a general statement that probably doesn't need to be cited. That's common fact. Be careful of some generalities. If you say, most people wake up wanting a cup of coffee. Ooh, is that something you need to have backed by research, backed by data, or is that just a clever opening? So there's some statements you're going to want to press on in your revision process and ask, is this too general? Is this an assumption? Am I making generalizations about people? But at a certain point in research, you'll want to consider your audience and what they know. If there are key dates in history, some are so well known that you do not have to cite them. Some artifacts in history are so well known that you don't have to go in depth describing them. You do want to give enough context that people can understand what you're writing, but if you're writing an academic paper and your audience is other researchers, they'll probably have the same baseline knowledge that you do. One recommendation is to write a knowledge inventory. So before you start your research, you write down everything you inherently know about the topic. And then you can go through that and think, okay, what of this have I read in a book that I need to go back and cite specifically? And what is so well known, so common that you probably do not need to cite it? So a knowledge inventory is useful because also at the end of your research, you could think, what did I know at the beginning? And what did I learn along the way? And that can help separate what you need to reference.
Great questions to answer. We see quite a few questions coming through on the number of references you need for a paper and how current they should be and relevance. So really, you should be citing all references that are relevant to your research. So when in doubt, cite and provide attribution as necessary. And so depending on the article type, right, if you're working on original research and an original research manuscript, conducting your own research and publishing that, you're probably going to have an exhaustive reference list, and it will probably be quite extensive. Again, check the journal author guidelines. Sometimes there are recommendations or limits in terms of minimum or maximum number of references, but really you want to be comprehensive in your reference list and make sure you're citing, providing citations where credit is due. If there's not a lot of literature out there, so one question we often get asked is, well, what if it's a new topic or there's not a lot of literature? I would ask why that is. I mean, can you broaden your search? Can you get a little more creative in your thinking, maybe cross into different disciplines, think about different keywords, and approach that search a little differently, come from maybe an adjacent angle and see if there's anything that can support or disprove your current hypothesis or your own literature. In terms of relevance and how current those should be, really you do want to show current literature. There will be some flags raised if all of your references are 10 plus years old. Now, maybe that's the last time something had been researched, and in that case, you should be very clear in your manuscript in addressing that. But whenever possible, you want to be citing current research, relevant research. And you can include some older references, but you don't want to have all one side. Editors will be looking for relevant literature in your citation list. Hannah, anything you want to add there?
Yes, as you do your research, you might find that there are some keystone pieces that a lot of scholars studying in this area reference. I have studied read a lot of Jane Austen research, and there are some key texts, some key books that were written decades and decades ago that are still referenced often now. So it's not that references written 10 plus years ago are bad. Some of them are actually crucial to your research and would seem like you left something very important out if you did not include them. At the same time, I would recommend using the search function in databases to narrow down your years, especially on a topic that's been written about for hundreds of years. Then you can ensure that you're only looking at the most recent research.
Absolutely. And this is going a little bit outside of our topic today, but um, thinking about how your own current research extends or build upon that earlier publication and why this extension is important for you and as you're submitting to a journal of your choice to that journal's readership. And so you're making a strong case why your manuscript is a good fit for the journal and it can increase the chances that it's accepted. So providing that well-rounded literature review, providing that well-rounded reference list is going to be important. And if your manuscript is not directly building upon a past article that was published in the same journal or anything like that, as long as it's meeting the aims and scope of that journal, that's totally fine. No journal should require that references from that journal be added to your reference list. It is possible that an editor, an associate editor might come back and recommend a reference from that journal be added, especially if there's something very relevant that they see or notice, some kind of gap in your reference list or citation. Ultimately, that is up to you whether or not to add, but it should never be mandatory. But you might get that as a recommendation. And be open to that. Maybe maybe you did miss something and you didn't come across it in your literature review, or maybe you go back and explain to the editor or associate editor why that is or is not a good fit, or why it does not add to your manuscript. Hannah, anything you want to add there?
No, but I do see a good question. It's if the reference is not correct, will the article be rejected? And I think that's related to what we've been talking about. So the answer is yes and no. It's complicated, right? When you submit a paper, there's mainly three options. It's going to be accepted, it's going to be rejected, or as Jessica was talking about, you'll be asked to revise and there'll be some back and forth. And then of course at Sage, we have a Sage path where sometimes articles are recommended to other journals within an industry. But so if a reference is not correct, will the article be rejected? If you have used a completely wrong citation style, the answer is probably, I would say maybe yes. Again, it depends, and it depends whose hands this gets into. But then also this could be a question of revision. If it's minor, can things be changed? Can they be adjusted? Overall, you want to show your competency as a researcher, and that includes having correct references. So you want to go in with these references as good as possible. And also because on the back end, if it does get published and something's wrong, as we mentioned, that could be plagiarism. That could get you in a lot of trouble and isn't how we want to interact with the scholarly ecosystem. Anything to add on that, Jessica?
No, I mean, you covered it perfectly. As a researcher, as an author, it is up to you to really follow those best practices and uphold research integrity. So making sure that you're comprehensive in your literature review and your citations, making sure the accuracy is there, talking with your authors, defining that those authorship roles up front, taking every effort possible to make sure that the data you've collected is accurate, that you've been transparent in the forms. We actually have a whole webinar on research integrity and ethics from the fall of last year that I encourage you to go back and watch. So we all have a role to play in maintaining that integrity in academia, and especially you as researchers and authors, and that is and can be reflected in your citations, because that's what you're building your manuscript on. That's what you're building your hypothesis and your theories, and you're extending or filling gaps, or using that to add to your discussion section for your manuscript. Oh, let's see. We've got some great questions coming in here. Let's see. One thing that will circulate, that I get a question all the time is, what happens when you encounter a paywall? When you don't have access to the full article. I wrote a blog a couple of years ago with some ways on how you can access and read the research that you need. And so if for some reason you don't have access to journals through your library, well, I mean, that's the first place, is go through your library, your organization, your institution. Look in these databases and the indices that we talked about. A lot of the full text is available. And maybe you get taken to the publisher site directly, and check if your library does have access. A lot of times, maybe it's through a third-party aggregator like Ovid, EBSCO, or JSTOR. Sage partners with Google Casa to help streamline off-campus library access. And we also have plugins like Lean Library that can help with getting that. Sometimes you can arrange an interlibrary loan with another library. Look for open access articles published under a Creative Commons license. Browse repositories like an institutional repository or another relevant repository in your field. You can also reach out to the corresponding author, or maybe someone has access where they can share that access. On the Sage Journals website, we have a share function that will provide anyone with 30 or 90 days free access, depending on the journal, to the EPUB format of the journal article. And so sometimes this link is shared on social media, or it's free to read. So we'll circulate this as a resource, but there are many, many different ways that you can get access to the research. So if you do encounter just the abstract or a paywall, there's many ways that you can read that full article to get what you're looking for. I see a few questions in here too that I want to cover on self-citations. It is acceptable to cite your own publications and previous publications. And that's a good point. Talking about plagiarism, make sure to actually use quotations and cite your previous work, and not just copy that over and not use quotation marks. It's important to cite even yourself from other papers, and then you can add that into your reference list, especially if it's building upon previous research. If a journal operates under double anonymous or single anonymous peer review, you might need to anonymize that in the manuscript file that you submit to the journal, and be sure to work with the journal editorial team before it gets accepted to unanonymize, de-anonymize those references so that everything is suitable for publication. Hannah, anything to add there? No. Great. Let's see, we've got some great questions in here. Hannah or Sean, sorry, I feel like I'm jumping in. Are there any questions that you want to jump in on?
One I saw, well, first I wanted to say to everyone on the call, I see a lot of comments coming through about participant, what you would receive after the call. Know that you will be getting the slides and you'll be getting a certificate of attendance. So for anybody who's attending with us live. A number of questions have popped up that about recent literature and what that constitutes. So we were talking before about how to include citations and what is I guess the limit. I'm curious, Hannah, Jessica, is there a hard and fast limit that people should work toward, as to say what is recent, or is this more so journal by journal, case by case? I think I led the answer there, but
Right. Jessica, I'll let you go first, and I'll hop in.
Yeah. So the answer is it depends on what you're researching, right? It depends on the field of study. It depends on the discipline. It depends on what you're actually looking up. I would say a general rule of thumb is 3 to 5 years is considered recent, but again, take that with a grain of salt because you think about COVID-19 research that you absolutely will have something ongoing and very, very current, very research, very current, very recent. And, but like Hannah mentioned, if you have research that maybe isn't done as regularly, it might be more spaced out and not as quote unquote recent, thinking 1 to 2 years. So it does vary. We don't have a hard and fast rule or number that we can give you saying this is the number to focus on. Hannah, anything to add there?
Yes, I always like to specify because I know we have quite a few students on here. Whatever your professor says, whatever your instructor says goes. Some do like to give specific dates, ranges that they would like research to be gathered on, especially in undergrad. Otherwise, yes, one recommendation I like is to look at the type of research you want to conduct. Go look at what's already published. Do they have more recent references that they're citing, or is it very heavy in older research? And you can think about how you want to fit in line with other researchers that are currently publishing in your field, how you want to disrupt that, and similar questions.
Absolutely. And that's going back to some of the foundations, right? As you're going through research and conducting data, gathering your data, conducting your data, you're going to be establishing some of those parameters with your team, with your PI, with your supervisor, with your department chair, with your maybe that's determined by the grants that you're applying for. Maybe it comes down to the journal that you're submitting to and following those requirements. You'll be thinking very early on about the type of research that you're conducting, and that will eventually lead into the type of manuscript that you end up publishing, which will also help define how you're conducting these reference searches. Original research is going to look very different from a literature review or a systematic review. In November, we had a webinar on that, or a book review or a case report. So we wanted to provide some general tips and guidance here today, some things to jumpstart you, give you ideas, how you can search, tools you can use. But a lot of it will come down to your specific hypothesis, your theory, your research, your team, and the journals that you're ultimately submitting to and how that factors in. And this ties in also, there are just several different style guides that have come about over the years, and so this is where journals use different style guides. And even across publishers, Sage, we have 1,200 journals, and as Hannah mentioned, the most common tend to be APA, Harvard, and Vancouver, but we have AMA and CSE, and journals are using all sorts of different style guides. So that's where you can do a general outline of your manuscript and get it quote unquote formatted, but then before you submit, that's where the author guidelines come into play and make sure you're following those formatting rules and guidelines, which will help narrow things down. Some people will write their manuscript with a specific journal in mind, that they know right away what journal they're targeting. Other people may not. And so you might start with a more general format. So we have 2 webinars on how to select a journal and how to write a paper. You can take some of those more general tips and use that as guidance. Or, you can even make your short list of 3 to 5 journals, take a look at those author guidelines just for some general guidance. What are they recommending for their original research manuscripts in terms of numbers of references and proper citations? Hannah, anything to add there?
No, but I do want to touch on real quick. I'm seeing lots of questions about how to paraphrase content without plagiarism. So in referencing other sources, you will likely quote, summarize, or paraphrase. Quote will be in direct quotes. If you're taking someone's words verbatim, you'll clearly want to cite that with an in-text citation. But then paraphrasing and summarizing is a bit slippery, right? Because you're using your own words to describe someone else's ideas. If the ideas are someone else's, whether it's your words, even if it's in your words, you do need to cite it. So that means an in-text citation following the style guide, maybe it'll be a parentheses or a superscript. But I also want to mention something I don't think we've brought up yet, which is you can integrate citations and you can reference references in your writing itself. It can flow with the sentence and it can feel very natural. So especially when paraphrasing, instead of just rattling off facts and information and then citing at the end of the sentence, you can actually introduce a paragraph or a sentence by introducing the reference by saying in Hannah Pearson's 2019 article, et cetera, et cetera. So then you are blending the citation with your writing and you're making sure you're giving credit where it's due.
Great. Thank you so much. Jessica, do you have anything else to add?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know if we have time for one more question. I know we're getting to the end of our time here together, but just wanted to let everyone know that there are still a number of questions pending. If you've been part of other webinars, we will reach out to you and follow up personally to make sure that all of your questions are answered. So rest assured, even though we didn't get to yours today, we will follow up and circle back.
Thank you very much. Just as a reminder, I will be sharing the slides with everybody as well as links to our upcoming webinars. As mentioned earlier, our next one will be on March 6th, all about qualitative methodology. And then later in April, we'll have a webinar about quantitative methodology. So if either is of interest. In addition, we have a separate webinar series, or how to be a peer reviewer webinar series. We'll have two, one in late March and then one in early April. And the one in early April will be specifically about how to become a reviewer for Sage Open, which is one of Sage's premier open access interdisciplinary journals. So if that's something of interest, please do be on the lookout there. So thank you all so much for joining today. A huge thank you to our panelists for taking part and for sharing your knowledge with everybody. And we hope to see everybody in a future webinar. Thank you very much and take care.